Hey guys, Scott Van Brunt. I lead our platform and partnerships team at Eventbrite, right around the corner here. So thank you guys for the location, very convenient. So I'm going to be talking about, as Cody said, the idea of kind of don't build it and they will come. So can you scale a developer platform and all these partnerships without actually doing any of the heavy lifting of actually building the integrations? And so I think our experience at Eventbrite would say it is possible. So I'll try to share kind of what we learned, maybe some tips, and like kind of what are the maybe prerequisites for that to be possible. And I think probably we're all here because we either have a platform, want a platform, or thinking about building a platform. And I think I think it's inherently attractive, this idea that you stand up the platform, you publish the docs, you open up your APIs, and people come and build on top of it. I think that's kind of the dream, right? And the dream is that you do all that, and then you have kind of partners coming out of the woodwork, coming out of the corn stalks, and building beautiful integrations, building beautiful applications on top of your platform. But there's obviously kind of the scary flip side reality, which is you devote all the resources, time, energy into building that platform. You do the same things, open up the APIs, publish the docs, and nobody comes. It's like you talking to yourself in the corn stalks, like Costner, people thinking he's crazy. So I think the other maybe analogy you can make is I think to think about partnerships a little bit like dating, right? So you're basically posing the question, will you go out with me? You're thinking, you're sizing up the other party. You're thinking, what did that person bring to the table? Is it worth my time to invest? Is it worth investing the time and energy into this? What am I going to get out of it? And is it worth it? And I think sort of in this idea that we can build these partnerships without actually doing kind of the heavy lifting, as it were. I think sometimes you're having those conversations and it could feel perhaps a little bit awkward and maybe like this. And we'll see if we get this video to play. I'll just leave it.
Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that you were looking in my direction.
Oh, yes, I was. You just ordered the same exact lunch as me.
My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents.
I'm Victoria. Hi.
So hopefully you can all hear that. So I think sometimes when you approach these partner conversations and you're saying, I have these APIs for you, these are all the cool things you could do, but I'm not going to actually do any of the integration. It's like, I'm 40 years old, I'm unemployed, I live with my parents. And they're like, well, what are you bringing to the table here? And I think that we're all hoping for the hi, I'm Victoria, but it's not shocking if you don't get that back. Sorry, just go for it. So he better have a good sense of humor. He better bring something else to the table if he doesn't have a job and he lives with his parents, right? So that's kind of the idea. It's like, well, what else are you bringing to the table? What is it that's going to make a partner say yes? How is that conversation not so implausible? By the way, that's one of my favorite episodes. It's where George does the complete opposite of his instinct, and everything goes amazingly right for him. Okay, so we're going to kind of come back to that idea, do a little bit of a quick aside first. So I think nowadays sort of everyone has a platform or is building a platform or wants to be a platform, right? So I think there's maybe a lot of different definitions of what that means and maybe what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to do kind of a quick clarification just so hopefully we're all on the same page what we mean. So I think one model perhaps of a platform that we might think about is you kind of have company A on the left, and they are their whole being is a set of APIs. That's kind of exclusively what they do is they expose a set of APIs that other products and services integrate into their product or service. You might think about random example, but maybe you think about Checker and Uber, right? So Checker is basically APIs for background checking, makes it really easy to do background checks kind of seamlessly, quickly, easily. And you have someone like Uber where they need to do a lot of background checks, and so they might integrate Checker's APIs into their product. And so this is kind of not the example that I'm talking about. So Checker having a platform, while they might describe it at that, that's sort of different than what I'll be focused on. This is more the model that I am talking about, and kind of that's the idea that there's you have kind of two products. One of those products or services wants to open a developer platform on top of their product to extend the functionality of that product. So you might use the example of Google Maps and Uber, right? So Uber might, let's say, open up a set of APIs to make it really easy or make it possible to hail a ride from another application. And you might have Google Maps who looks at that and say, okay, I want to integrate those APIs and make it possible for my users to hail a ride from within Google Maps. And so really this is kind of the model we're talking about, or that I'm talking about, I guess. And so just to kind of put a finer point on this, and just steal an idea that one of my former colleagues at Eventbrite used to describe this difference. So on the left side, he would call it a utility API, and on the right side, an ecosystem API. And so for a utility API, you're really, you're building with that API, and then an ecosystem API, you're building for that API. And so these these are just perhaps some representative examples. On the left-hand side, the utility API, these are all sort of APIs that get integrated perhaps in the kind of in the background of the product or service. The end user doesn't necessarily know they're interacting with any of these services. Whereas the ecosystem API, these are more in the foreground. The user actually does understand that they are interacting with those services through whatever other application. So you might think about the APIs on the left-hand side, like that's their day job, that's all they do. On the right side, it's kind of sort of more of a side hustle. It's built on top of the sort of main product or service. Cool. So hopefully, that is a somewhat helpful clarification. And then, sort of diving back into platforms. I think we all, again, have a definition in our mind of what a platform is. One definition that is really sort of helpful and clarifying for me is this one, which is a platform provides the infrastructure and rules for really a marketplace that brings together producers and end users. So this isn't very technical. The word API or anything isn't here, but it's just sort of reinforcing the core idea that really what a platform does is provide infrastructure for a marketplace that brings together these two distinct sides, producers and end users. And to me, this is kind of like the critical thing of what defines a successful platform, whether it can perform this function. And as I talk about what we aspire to be as a platform at Eventbrite, I think this is kind of the success metric that we would look at. This is just a diagram that I stole from Harvard Business Review, but sort of reinforces that exact same point, right? So the platform owner is just providing infrastructure, and the key thing that's happening is that value exchange between producers and consumers. So you might think of that as like developers and end users. They use the language here, producers and consumers. This is an example of Android, but hopefully just that sort of diagram and visual is helpful. Cool. So if we know kind of what type of platforms, we know what a platform is, come back kind of to this idea of growing the platform. And it's like you have a platform now, how do you get people to build on top of it? So I'm going to talk about just a couple of approaches that I've seen, and then I'm going to go deep on the last one, which is sort of Eventbrite's approach, and this idea of don't build it and they will come. The kind of call out here is that these are definitely not MISI in consulting speak, so they're not mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. These are by no means all of the ways that you could grow a platform. And just because, and if you're using one of these approaches, it does not mean that you can't use the other approaches shown here. Cool. So the first approach I'll talk about is the idea of sort of seeding a platform. I think this is probably very intuitive. And that's the idea of basically developing a subset of integrations, kind of a critical mass of integrations yourself, and doing that in-house. and really helping to start the marketplace and start those network effects between producers and end users. And kind of the idea is again really just like start the flywheel, start that network effect. That there's it's going to be much easier to convince like sort of future partners that that they want to come build on top of your platform if there is already a critical mass of end users using that platform, and that there's sort of demonstrated success there, right? So this is just kind of one example I grabbed. I think there's probably myriad examples of this, but this is one of our partners, HubSpot, and if you look through their sort of partner catalog, very small font down there, you'll notice that like certain integrations are tagged as native integrations, and that just means that they have built they've built those integrations themselves, and obviously the assumption there is that there is a sort of intrinsic benefit to the partner ecosystem by having those there where it was worth their effort to do that, and it makes acquiring future partners, it makes the platform more valuable to end users, and then it makes acquiring future partners and integrations perhaps that much easier. So the second example is I'll call like invest, right? So this is the idea that you can basically make development dollars available to partners and target and allocate those dollars to select partners, to select use cases in order to jumpstart the platform, right? And I think the basic idea is kind of going back to that dating example is that there's some, even if it's not explicit, there's some cost-benefit analysis that everyone's doing in their head of, is it worth my time to build on top of your platform? What's the payback period? What's the return? And this idea of perhaps incentivizing development through dollars just hopefully makes that cost-benefit analysis kind of a no-brainer and really de-risks any investment in terms of time, effort that the partner has to make. And again, there's probably lots of examples of this. Just a couple that I cherry-picked. There's MailChimp going back a number of years. This is from November 2010, where they launched a $1 million integration fund, and I know they strategically allocated that to specific use cases. A more recent example that, and I guess the next talk will be by Slack, but the more recent example is Slack and the $80 million fund that they created for developers on their platform in conjunction with a lot of partners. So they really took that to the next level, and I guess the lesson there is it's nice to be Slack. And then the last one, sorry for the cheesy names, is Cultivate. And that's kind of the idea, just like you're just really promoting the value and selling the value of the platform. Kind of going back to that idea of connecting producers and users and what is the inherent value of the platform. And so this is really just kind of about BD and being out there and sort of promoting that vision, promoting that value. So use Eventbrite as sort of the case study here because that's obviously the one that I know and understand. So we do have a partner program. We call it the Eventbrite Spectrum Partner Program, where obviously there's requirements to be part of the program and then benefits that they get out of it. In terms of where we are today, we have around 160 partners that are part of the Eventbrite Spectrum program, and by and large, I think 99% of these were built by our partners. There's maybe one or two examples in here where we actually paid a third party to go develop that. Kind of the main example of that is Salesforce. But otherwise, all of these were built by partners, and we went out and specifically got their buy-in to invest their time, their money to do that. So I guess as we think about, well, what is it that we can offer partners then? Like what makes them willing to do that? There's really probably two things, but the first main one would be users. Going back to that idea of connecting producers and users, the most important thing that we can offer our partners is users. And at Eventbrite, we are, I guess, fortunate to be at this point the largest community of event organizers and event attendees in the world. Like some vanity metrics on this slide that we would push to, our partners, obviously. More than 60 million people buy a ticket on Eventbrite every year. We have well more than 500,000 active event organizers. We're selling more than 2 million tickets a week. We are a global company in terms of our footprint and where those users are distributed. So that's one. I think two is, as we're talking about those vanity metrics and the user base we have, the other thing we're obviously talking about is momentum, right? Partners aren't just betting on what Eventbrite looks today. They're making a bet, is this company growing? Is the user base likely to grow with it? And so hopefully showing the track record we have here and the momentum we have in the business is a good reason to bet on Eventbrite. I think another thing that's important is just how how diverse that user base is. So there's lots of different ways that you might segment and think about Eventbrite's user base. I'm just sort of showing one here, which is the different types of events that get organized, and that there's critical mass within each of these different verticals. And so basically we have all different types of events. Those events comes in all shapes and sizes, which means that there's lots of different needs that those organizers have for partner solutions and partner applications. And it may mean that just because we have one partner in a given use case, it doesn't mean that there isn't more need from our organizers for other partners that solve a similar use case, but maybe have a different pricing or business model, or kind of going after a higher or lower end of the market. So I think this is this is important, and I think it's really important just that we help our partners think about, well, which specific user base within these many, which niche are you going after, and that's kind of how we can be most helpful to you in figuring out how you can reach those users. So this is kind of a results slide. So I'm sort of showing the results here last, but this is to me kind of when the dream of like Eventbrite's platform became more real. And so I think it's like nice to talk about the size of the user base and how big it is, and you can reach all these 500,000 plus organizers, 60 million attendees. But ultimately, like how successful our platform comes down to our ability to connect our partners to those users. And so we made a change to our platform about 2 years ago, and this slide is basically an example of the results of that change. So this slide basically shows one of our partners' applications prior to the change versus post, and you see they go from, in terms of number of monthly active users, and going from about 1,000 monthly active users to 9,000 almost overnight, and that's a result of some changes we made to the platform. The way that we talk about that, or the way we describe that change is we introduced this concept of an on-platform extension, and there's really kind of two new things about on-platform extensions. So what I'm showing here is the kind of main dashboard an organizer would be looking at within Eventbrite when they're organizing their event. And down the left-hand column there, we have a section called extensions, and that's basically the ability to discover these extensions without going to the separate kind of app store page. And then the other thing is actually for the ability for the extension to run, to load and run kind of what looks like natively within Eventbrite. So I'm going to show kind of more about the before and after, but this, it's really those two things, kind of the enhanced discoverability and the ability to actually use the partner's application within Eventbrite that account for that sort of almost 10x change that we saw on the previous slide. So this is actually before, so hopefully this GIF will kind of work, but basically what you saw was they were in the App Store, they clicked on MailChimp, they get bounced over to MailChimp, and they go through all kind of the normal hoops of going to their account, integrations, installing Eventbrite, signing in. So that's kind of the this will be like kind of the off-platform world. That would be the typical flow where the start here is the App Store, and then they're clicking off. This is the after, so where they would install the app. Now the authentication is happening right up front, and then it's actually just loading their application directly within Eventbrite. So that's the sort of big difference here, is that it's, again, is that discoverability down that left hand, kind of within the main dashboard that I showed, and then the ability that this is like loading and the organizers setting everything up right here within their Eventbrite dashboard is the big difference. So there's a old, I think 2007 Mark Andreessen article that I sort of stumbled upon as putting these slides together, and I had never seen it before and didn't know about this kind of idea of 3 levels of platform, but I found it sort of helpful in describing what that change that we had made about 2 years ago to bring those off-platform extensions on platform. And so the idea that he describes is a level 1 platform. Basically, everything is happening in in the partners world, and they're just making API calls back to your platform to pull data, whatever. A level 2 platform, which is I would think kind of what we graduated to, is the idea that the platform's app still runs elsewhere, but it actually injects functionality into your platform. And I think that's what kind of making that jump of allowing partner applications to live within Eventbrite, inject that functionality, and to be discovered and used directly there is kind of, to me, was the key thing that allowed us to really accelerate. Cool. So that's kind of our journey around users, how the size of our user base, how we talk about that, and how we allow partners to hopefully be discovered and used more. I think the other thing in terms of why partners might choose to build on top of Eventbrite's platform, the other kind of theme that we see is features, right? So we have a lot of partners that we talk to who they express they're seeing some need in their application in their product or service for like ticketing and registration functionality, the core things that Eventbrite does well. And like without going into kind of all like microeconomics lesson, there's kind of the idea of comparative advantage, right? So comparative advantage is like dictated by your opportunity cost, and the cost of building sort of non-core features is really high. And so we've had a lot of great partner conversations where we've been either able to convince them not to go down the rabbit hole of building sort of ticketing functionality and just to build on top of Eventbrite, and in some cases we've actually been able to convince them to actually rip out ticketing functionality that they've started building and saying you're maybe much better off just using Eventbrite. Focus your dev resources on the area where you have competitive advantage or comparative advantage, so I think that's just kind of an interesting point, an interesting kind of use case you could be on the lookout for of where you might be able to convince a partner to build on your platform. And we did a little postmortem of when we launched that on-platform extensions capability, and we looked at how much time partners had invested in building their applications versus what our team had spent time on. We saw it was kind of like a 90-10 difference, and that's like I think what it is actually the optimal allocation, right? So instead of us investing all those time to build those features, partners were able to spend their time, and I think like the total economic value created was so much higher in this combination than if we had tried to do it all ourselves. Cool. So I guess just one last closing thought, and that is again another kind of econ slide, but the idea of your BATNA or your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So as I said before, like 99% of, basically 100% of partner integrations, Eventbrite has not built, and we have like no track record, no history of building integrations, and so it's kind of nice in that we adopted that philosophy like almost 10 years ago, and we've just stuck to it. And it's almost become it's just become kind of part of the culture and just something that everyone understands. And it's kind of nice then when you go into a partner conversation as a sort of forcing function. We just understand that our team is not going to spend resources developing specific integrations, and so I think it really sort of narrows the conversation. Is a forcing function to understand, is there a possible partnership here, and what would it have to look like given that constraint of our team doesn't spend time building integrations, and that's just sort of taken for gospel in our organization. So that's that. Open up to questions.
Got the mic here in case somebody needs that. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you guys expose partners directly within your app.
Yep.
What are the design? I mean, the PMs and the designers in here are probably like, well, how did you do that, and how do you make sure they conform to your standards, and like, how did you build that in a way that it does flow and work with your product?
Yeah. So I think the kind of key thing is when we opened that platform up, it was an invite-only process. So we had 100+ partners at the time that had these off-platform extensions. We went out and cherry-picked at the time like the top 10 or 20 and invited them to build in kind of a beta phase that on-platform extension. And so there were strict kind of design requirements, and the intention is that it does feel very native to Eventbrite. That as the organizer, you realize you're interacting with some other service, but it doesn't feel like it. And so we did that by incorporating, we have the partner incorporate our style guide into that iframe that loads there within Eventbrite. So hopefully reduces the work on the partner's part in terms of like any front end work they have to do, and then obviously makes it feel and look very much native to Eventbrite in terms of matching everything else that's going on there.